Yeah, I'll react to that, sure. We ready, gang? I just finished watching part 3, and it was too good of a cliffhanger for me not to just start part 4 right now. So that's what we're doing. Original link to the video, guys, top of the description from Kings and Generals. I'd recommend watching the previous parts. That is completely up to you, either from my recommendations or from Kings and Generals. Up to you, again. Preemptive like. We're good. We're good. All right, let's go. In-frame, audio working. Start.
In 1827, the tides of the revolution had turned back in the Greeks' favor, as the three titans, Britain, France, and Russia, finally came to their aid. However, regardless of his scope of his new enemies, Sultan Mahmud II...
Sorry, guys. The last episode just ended with the big powers like Russia, France, Britain sending ships about to get involved after the Ottomans, after an agreement was reached that Greece would still be the Greek territory would still be part of the Ottoman Empire, but would have some autonomy, and recognition. And then the Sultan called the bluff, but I don't think it's a bluff because they're sending ships. So let's go.
The three titans, Britain, France, and Russia.
Let's just start over. Frickin'.
In 1827, the tides of the revolution had turned back in the Greeks' favor, as the three titans, Britain, France, and Russia, finally came to their aid. However, regardless of his scope of his new enemies, Sultan Mahmud II was still resolved to grind his rebellious peasants to dust. Welcome to our fourth and final episode on the Greek War of Independence, where we'll cover the decisive naval battle at Navarino, the final stages of the military conflict, and the political maelstrom which would determine the modern Greek nation-state's place in the international community for centuries to come. But as well as states, people have their place in the world.
Sponsor, guys, like all the videos, if you're interested in the sponsor and you learned about it here and you want to try it out, just please make sure to use their promo codes and links. Again, the link to the original video from Kings and Generals, top of the description, and you'll find the links there. It's only right, guys.
2. Usually limited by language barriers. If you have the time and will, you can break any of these, but it's not always easy. That's why we have good news from this video's sponsor.
Wait, hold on. You can go forward if you want, guys. This is all hello in different languages. Bonjour, hola. So French, Spanish, salve. Is that Italian? Good dog? Swedish or something? Guten Tag, that's German, right? Aloha is Hawaiian. That looks Korean to me. Okay.
Break any of these, but it's not always easy. That's why we have good news from this video's sponsor, Speakly, a language learning app that brings a dramatic acceleration in the language learning process. The theory is they've crafted language lessons based on analysis of thousands of learners, so there's absolutely nothing you are taught that doesn't have direct applications, hammering home all the bare-bone essentials as much as possible. It was found that this speeds up language learning by up to 5 times, getting you speaking to a usable degree in 3 to 4 months of practice if you commit to 30 minutes per day of lessons. The lessons themselves cover all the usual material: vocab, speaking, writing, listening, and even music, and you pick and choose the method you prefer to learn things, with different versions of lessons available, or combinations of different methods. You can get the app via our link in the description. It's free to try for 7 days, and then if you buy an annual subscription, you'll get 60% off. See if it works for you, and if it does, you'll be speaking a new language by the end of the year. In the summer of 18...
Ready, boys and girls? Got anyone?
1827. In the summer of 1827, Britain, France, and Russia had signed a joint agreement to establish Greece as an autonomous nation under the loose suzerainty of the Ottoman Sultan. However, defiant in the face of outside nations interfering in internal civil unrest within his empire, Sultan Mahmud II unilaterally rejected this and geared up to confront the great powers. On the 7th of September 1827, the combined fleets of the Sublime Porte and Ibrahim's modern Egyptian armada anchored in the Bay of Navarino in anticipation of the arrival of their new foes. Sure enough, less than a week later, a British fleet under one Admiral Edward Codrington anchored a ways outside the harbour, with a French flotilla commanded by Count de Rigny joining it shortly after, and the Russian ships under the Dutch Admiral Lodewijk van Heyden en route. On the 25th of September, the Admirals Codrington and de Rigny parleyed with Ibrahim Pasha on the beach north of Pylos. The two sides were at an impasse. Ibrahim was under orders from the Sultan to attack the Hellenic naval stronghold of Hydra Island, while the Allied admirals were under orders to prevent any further ravaging of Greek lands. Codrington warned Ibrahim that if the Turco-Egyptian ships sailed for Hydra, the Allies would have to sink them all. Ibrahim weighed his options. He was deeply outgunned, as the Europeans had 10 ships of the line, the dreadnoughts of the era, while the Turco-Egyptian fleet only had 3. Thus, the Egyptian Pasha played for time, agreeing for now to keep his fleets in Navarino harbour while he awaited new orders from the port. Satisfied, the British and French admirals sailed away to reprovision, leaving only 2 ships at Navarino Bay to report on Ibrahim's actions. This uneasy ceasefire lasted about as long as one would imagine. The Greeks, for their part, were still fighting on. In the last days of September, Hellenic forces launched a campaign on Patras, and under the leadership of Richard Church, who was kind of doing a redemption arc thing after the debacle at Athens, destroyed a flotilla of 7 Ottoman ships in the Gulf of Corinth. This enraged Ibrahim, who wondered why the Europeans imposed an armistice on him, but allowed his enemies to continue waging war. So he weighed anchor at Athens, destroyed a flotilla of 7 Ottoman ships in the Gulf of Corinth. This enraged Ibrahim, who wondered why the Europeans imposed an armistice on him, but allowed his enemies to continue waging war. So he weighed anchor and attempted to sail to reinforce the Ottoman garrison in
I'm dumb.
war. So he weighed anchor and attempted to sail to reinforce the Ottoman garrison in Patras, but Codrington caught wind of this, and the British ships arrived in time to fire warning shots at them, forcing the Turco-Egyptian fleet back into Navarino Bay. At sea, Ibrahim was hemmed in. However, on land, the Allies had no forces, and the Egyptians still had a mostly unopposed 20,000-strong army. So, leaving his ships, Ibrahim resumed command of his ground forces and began ravaging the Peloponnese once more, albeit dogged by Kolokotronis and his guerrilla fighters. By now,
this action, with which you would terrify us, threatening to cut down and burn up our fruit-bearing trees, is not warfare. The senseless trees cannot oppose themselves to anyone. But we will not submit, not if you cut down every branch. Theodorus Kolokotronis.
Hayden's, albeit dogged by Kolokotronis and his guerrilla fighters.
Guys, when it comes to the appearing texts like this, if I can read it fast enough and it's not something that I want to comment on, I'll just read it quick without pausing and then continue. If it's too long and I need to read it, I'll pause. Or if it's short enough but I want to comment, I'll pause. So that's kind of the rules I'm coming up with as I go for the pop-ups, because they can be pretty important.
Once more, albeit dogged by Kolokotronis and his guerrilla fighters. By now, Hayden's Russian fleet had joined the British and French squadrons, and it had become clear to all the Allied admirals that either Ibrahim nor the rulers in Alexandria and Istanbul who enabled him would never relent in their desire to grind the Greek rebellion to dust. As the senior admiral of the combined Allied forces, Codrington realized that there was only one recourse left to him. On October 20th, 1827, the combined might of the British, French and Russian navies sailed into Navarino Bay with their gunports raised, and the battle was joined. In the end, it was a completely one-sided affair. Outgunned and outmatched, over 60 Egyptian and Ottoman ships were consigned to the bottom of Navarino Bay, condemning over 6,000 hands to drown with them. In contrast, the Allies suffered less than 200 fatal casualties and lost no ships. Mehmet Ali's modern navy, the pride of invincible Egypt, had been obliterated, and as a result, an absolutely crippling blow had been dealt to Sultan Mehmed II. After the Battle of Navarino, the result of the Greek War of Independence was set in stone. For 6 long years, the fate of Hellas had been hanging in the balance, but now Greece would be free. However, the Greek nation, if one could even call it that at this point, was in dire straits. After the 3-year spree of Ibrahim's marauding, the land was utterly desolate, while factional squabbles between
Marta to Napoctos wrote a contemporary traveler, "We did not meet a single human creature. It is a vast desert. Elsewhere, a few Greeks came out from the rocks and appeared before us like ghosts. Famished ghosts."
revoluting, the land was utterly desolate, while factional squabbles between revolutionary warlords had resurfaced. Even with freedom secured, it seemed that the Greeks were destined to remain an impoverished, divided, and little people. That is, unless a true ruler could take the reins and pull together the frayed threads that was Hellas. It is here that the statesman himself, Ioannis Capodistrias, finally re-enters our story. Back in the summer of 1827, the Greek National Assembly, or what was left of it anyways, had met at Trozen. With allies on the way, Hellas had a future once more, and it was time to put affairs of state back in order. There they had ratified a new national constitution, an amendment to the one crafted by Mavrocordatos at Epidaurus in 1822. More importantly, they unanimously elected Ioannis Capodistrias, by far the most accomplished Greek-born politician in Europe, to serve as leader of the Hellenic state. As one may recall from our first video, when the revolution first broke out in 1821, Capodistrias had been offered a leadership position on account of his vast experience.
I'm so upset that I don't remember this.
As Russia's Capodistrias had been offered
it's a familiar name, but I don't remember it enough to be satisfied right now, and I'm upset.
Broke out in 1821, Capodistrias had been offered a leadership position on account of his vast experience as Russia's chief foreign minister. However, he declined the role, condemning the insurrection as unwinnable folly. He had been wrong about that, but hindsight is 2020. The situation had changed, so when Capodistrias was elected by the National Assembly, he accepted what must have seemed like the role he was destined for. On January 18, 1828, Capodistrias landed in Nafplion. Having been born in the Venetian, then French, then British-controlled island of Corfu, and spent the lion's share of his adult life as a Russian statesman, it was the first time he had set foot in mainland Greece. The first thing he did was persuade the Greek Senate to suspend the Constitution and the National Assembly and temporarily give him full powers. Greece, he declared, was not yet ready for democracy. He was wary of the various factions within the Hellenic body politic, who had spent the duration of the war fighting one another more than they had actually fought the Ottomans, and did not want to have to navigate around the capricious whims of squabbling magnates and warlords just to get anything done. Luckily for him, the National Assembly willingly gave him full control. Capodistrias was a civil servant in every sense of the word. Working from 5 in the morning to 10 at night every day, he utilized his vast state-building experience to rebuild the pillars of Greek society.
He reminds me of Andrew Jackson just from his look. And given the time period, is Andrew Jackson not president right now? Just let me just let me look it up real quick. Andrew Jackson presidency. 1829 to 1837.
So thoroughly eviscerated by 6 years of brutal war. To that end, he involved himself in every theater of national reconstruction, developing the foundation.
Hold on.
Working from 5 in the morning, Capodistrias was a civil servant in every sense of the word. Working from 5 in the morning to 10 at night every day, he utilized his vast state-building experience to rebuild the pillars of Greek society, so thoroughly eviscerated by 6 years of brutal war. To that end, he involved himself in every theater of national reconstruction, developing the foundations of a standard currency, a method of taxation, a legal framework, courts of justice, orphanages and schools, and even a modern quarantine system to fight the typhoid, cholera, and dysentery epidemics which had spread like wildfire during the worst years of the war.
I understand it. It's just kind of funny, so I'm going to say it. Capodistrias was a chronic micromanager. For example, he regularly sent letters to the schools with instructions down to the exact type of water pump they should use. Gotta admire that.
However, the titanic task of domestic reconstruction was but one of Capodistrias' many challenges. For one thing, there was still technically a war on. Although Ibrahim Pasha's navy had been destroyed, the man himself, alongside 20,000 ground troops, was still active in the Peloponnese. In the summer of 1828, a French expeditionary force landed in the Peloponnese to support the Greeks, who, having previously been on the ropes against Ibrahim Pasha's relentless onslaught, were imbued with a renewed fighting spirit to finally crush the loathsome Egyptian host which had terrorized their homeland so thoroughly. However, Ibrahim knew that the conquest of the Peloponnese was no longer feasible. Despite all the terrors he had inflicted on the Morea, he had not crushed the Greek spirit, and now, with the situation turning decidedly against him, it was time to make a graceful exit. Through the eloquent work of French diplomats in Alexandria, Governor Mehmed Ali agreed to order his son's return home. On the 4th of October 1828, Ibrahim and his Egyptian legions departed the ancient land of Hellas. Over the last 3 years, Ibrahim Pasha had turned the Peloponnese into a barren wasteland. However, in the end, he gained absolutely nothing out of it. After his departure, the bulk of Ottoman-aligned forces in Greece were gone, and the forts in the Peloponnese, which had been occupied by the Egyptians, fell mainly into French hands. Capodistrias, meanwhile, had been busy doing away with the loose hodgepodge of bandit gangs who had thus far carried the Greek cause, but also proven extremely prone to insubordination and infighting. To that end, he established the...
It's got to be difficult when you're dealing with people who are extremely important, maybe to the revolution or fight for independence, in some way civil war, prior to a more peaceful and optimistic time where you're trying to set up the actual Greek state for the future. And I'm sure a lot of betrayal happens when people who are, although extremely important to the cause, and perhaps even crucial to the cause, just don't fare well for a unified Greece and might just end up splitting it. So got to be some hard decisions made.
Hellenic Army Academy and a regular Greek Army Corps.
I made sense there, right, guys? I'm
deployed in extremely prone to insubordination and infighting. To that end, he established the Hellenic Army Academy and a regular Greek Army Corps, which he deployed into central Greece, hoping to take as much land as possible from the Ottomans to strengthen the Hellenic state's territorial claims when the time came to properly define its borders. Certain familiar faces were appointed to spearhead this campaign. In eastern Roumeli, Dimitrios Ypsilantis began securing the hinterlands around Athens, while in the west, the old goat Kolokotronis, fighting alongside his British bromance Richard Church, liberated the Gulf of Arta and its surrounding environs. These advances were aided in part by the fact that in April of 1828, Russia had finally launched a full-scale invasion of the Ottoman Empire, which had stretched the Sublime Porte's military capacity to its very limits. However, Capodistrias' relations with his generals were strained, to say the least. His predilection for micromanagement infuriated the military men, who were perfectly capable of leading an army without the constant nagging of this bookish civilian statesman.
Because I'm sure there were a lot of people who needed that micromanagement, and so when it came to people who didn't need it, I'm sure maybe that kind of transferred to them, and he needed to dial back a bit when it came to people who were actually competent. And I guess he didn't.
Of leading an army without the constant nagging of this bookish civilian statesman. Thank you very much. Capodistrias' quarrels with the likes of Ypsilantis and Church were ultimately indicative of the great statesman's deeply strained relationship with the Greek elites, a schism which would eventually lead to his doom. On December 21st, 1828, the ambassadors of Britain, France, and Russia...
Hold on. What?
Statesman, thankful of leading an army without the constant nagging of this bookish civilian statesman. Thank you very much. Capodistrias' quarrels with the likes of Ypsilantis and Church were ultimately indicative of the great statesman's deeply strained relationship with the Greek elites, a schism which would eventually lead to his doom. On December 21st, 1828, the ambassadors of Britain, France, and Russia met on the island of Poros to discuss the borders of the new Greek nation. Whether Capodistrias liked it or not, the future of his people was now in the hands of these three titans, so he had to play ball with them. Capodistrias himself argued that the Hellenic state's borders should extend from Delvina to Thessaloniki, while representatives of the current British Prime Minister, the Duke of Wellington, yes, the Waterloo guy, wanted to confine the Greek state solely to the Peloponnese.
I'm sure part of the calculations going on is how much can you... is not necessarily like they're worried about giving Greece too much land for Greece, but I'm sure the calculation is more about how much land can we give to Greece while still leaving the Ottoman Empire as a powerful, cohesive empire.
In the end, the diplomats at Poros agreed to a border which ran from Arta to the Gulf of Volos, which they argued would be the most practical and easily defendable frontier for young Hellas. Notably not present at the Conference of Poros were any representatives of Sultan Mahmud II, who was still clinging to the increasingly unrealistic prospect of reconquering his erstwhile Rumelian territories. However, the Sublime Porte's tune changed when in September of 1829, the ongoing Russo-Turkish War ended in their defeat, resulting in the Russians annexing more of their Black Sea territory and taking their place as the overlords of the Romanian Principalities.
Who are the yellow guys over here?
His position critically weakened, Sultan Mahmud II finally agreed to accept the terms of the 1827 Treaty of London, whereby Greece would become an autonomous state, but still his tributary vassal. However, for Britain and France, this was no longer good enough. To them, Russia's recent gains were threatening, and if Greece remained an Ottoman vassal, no matter how nominally, then it would always remain under the predominant influence of the Tsar in St. Petersburg. So the British and French, influenced in no small part by Capodistrias' political...
At this point, you might figure, like, the Ottoman Empire is going to become incredibly weak no matter what. And so maybe we should give as much territory to the Greeks and then reinforce the Greeks to become their own power. Might be the better choice at this point.
It would always remain under the predominant influence of the Tsar in St. Petersburg. So the British and French, influenced in no small part by Capodistrias' political maneuvering, conceived that Greece would not be an autonomous vassal, but a completely independent nation-state, under the equal protection of all three great powers. This decision was ratified in the London Protocol of 1830, which the Russians only reluctantly agreed to, and the Ottomans were in no position to refuse. Thus, that
tells you that it was probably a good idea on the French and British's part.
International community welcomed the independent Hellenic nation-state into the fold.
Guys, I gotta pee so bad. We'll be right back. All right, I'm back. I washed my hands.
In the end, the Greek War of Independence Hellenic nation-state into the fold. In the end, the Greek War of Independence concluded in the same way much of it was carried out, with bloody infighting. That Ioannis Capodistrias had done much for Greece was indisputable, but in his short time in power, his complete mistrust of the Greek elites who had carried the revolution caused him to make several powerful enemies. Among these were the powerful maritime magnates of Hydra and the Maniots under Petros Mavromichalis, two areas of Greece deeply accustomed to localized self-rule. when, in the interest of centralizing the state, Capodistrias forced stringent taxation policies upon them and tried to impose regional governors on them, he was instead faced with an uprising on his hands. In May 1831, the Hydriots convened their own National Assembly in direct defiance of Capodistrias' government, and declared the Maniot Lord, Mavromichalis, to be their president. Even a certain Alexandros Mavrokordatos came out of retirement to support this rival regime. However, Capodistrias put down this rebellion. Sinking the Hydriot frigate Hellas in the process. To prevent further insurrection, he had Mavromichalis arrested and imprisoned. This would be his final mistake. To the mafia-like Maniots, such an act was enough to trigger a blood feud, and as such, the Mavromichalis clan resolved to kill the great statesman for the incarceration of their patriarch. On the 9th of October, 1831...
It is insane, almost admirable, that even surrounded by a power that has been subduing you for so long and fighting and killing you, that in internal conflicts can still be this powerful to, despite the possibility of Ottoman rule again, you're still going to stand up against the people that are within the new territory that you wanted to gain.
The incarceration of their patriarch.
Does that make sense?
On the 9th of October, 1831, as the first president of the Hellenic state walked up the steps to the Church of Napoleon to attend the morning service, he found himself confronted by Petros's brother, Konstantis Mavromichalis, and his son, Hiochios Mavromichalis. Without due ceremony, they shot and stabbed Capodistrias to death. Immediately afterwards, Greece was plunged into chaos, and all that Capodistrias had accomplished threatened to become undone. In this, the great powers saw opportunity. They had long preferred that Greece be a monarchy rather than a republic. After all, in a still revolutionarily charged...
Is it because a monarchy is just easier to... It's got to be. Just because a monarchy is easier to negotiate with, I'm assuming, with more power.
Rather than a republic.
You don't have to deal with, like, the bureaucracy of a republic.
After all, in a still revolutionarily charged Europe, it set a better precedent for their own divinely appointed monarchs. So it was in May of 1832, a German prince, Otto I, was imported from his native Bavaria.
Is this where King Philip comes, or Queen Elizabeth II's husband, Philip? Although undoubtedly foreign, Otto's family were Philhellenes, who had donated significantly to the Greek Revolution and allegedly were descendants of the imperial Byzantine Lascaris dynasty. Wasn't it Denmark, too?
To Greece, and Otto I was imported from his native Bavaria to Greece and appointed the first monarch of a re-augmented Kingdom of Greece, stabilizing the country once more. When the Kingdom of Greece emerged onto the world stage in 1832,
monarchies just make so much more sense now, because if you're already a monarchy trying to push for other nations' independence, what's even better maybe than controlling a lot of areas is just having monarchies that you can negotiate with in control of areas that, if they are captured in some way, don't directly affect you. So much is making sense.
When the Kingdom of Greece emerged onto the world stage in 1832, it was small, poor, and ruled by a foreign king who was imposed upon them by three great powers who held significant sway over the young nation's internal politics.
I guess it's the price you gotta pay. Right?
Only a third of all ethnic Greeks in the Ottoman Empire had been liberated, as Hellenes in Cyprus, Crete, Thrace, the Pontus, and beyond remained under the rule of the Sublime Porte. Many Greeks who had once prospered under the Sultan, like the Phanariot merchants, were now no longer able to do so, looked upon in suspicion and disdain. Overall, it was not quite the freedom that Greece had hoped for, but it was freedom nonetheless. No matter the circumstances, the Greeks were the first people to win full independence from the Ottoman Empire, and the modern Greek nation-state they created is the very same which, through trials and tribulations, endures to this day. In the coming months, we'll release the feature-length version of this series, which will include detailed descriptions of a number of battles that happened during the Greek War of Independence. So make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button to see it. Please consider liking, commenting, and sharing. It helps immensely.
Guys, that was fantastic. All 4 episodes there. It's very enjoyable. I feel like I learned a lot. I love how it connected to other stuff, and I guess even it being in the 1820s and 30s, itself was a really great thing for me, because between like Crimean War, maybe even between, actually no, between, I would even say, the Franco-Prussian War and let's be real, between the Napoleonic Wars and World War I don't know a lot. But when it comes to the post-Napoleonic War to like mid-19th century, I really don't know that much. So to learn about a conflict in that era is really cool. Love y'all. Hope you guys are all doing well. Would appreciate any comments down below. And hopefully I'll see you guys next video. Bye, guys. We'll keep on learning.